This is a series of comments on my section one. I may share this with both classes of 804, but your comments on new faces on Main Street went way beyond what just the video, but your own experiences. And I hope no one objects, but I want to share this love your stories with my Wednesday night ESL class, because these are extraordinary stories. And they really get to the heart of both ESL and dealing with diversity. And it happens when we talk multicultural, we're dealing a lot with ESL, which is my area also. Just wonderful comments. This is probably the best, until I read the other one, this is the best set of comments on new faces and sharing of stories I've ever read. Amazing stuff. You know, this is the textbook for the class, not Banks. If you just participate in the discussion, it's so rich. So many things here. I'm just going to start with little things and build up, and I may ramble a little bit, but I can't just write back individual responses because I need to share this with the class. Something that Jennifer said really got me. You mentioned your nerd side, the Borg, and the word assimilation. And people assume assimilation means to become like us, and it means that there'll be a new culture forming, but nobody's going to dictate what it's going to be. It's not going to be you're going to be me, or I'm going to be you, but I'll be me, and then I'll be some part of what you are too. And that's threatening to people. But I love that, the collective hive. Anybody that watches Star Trek Next Generation, the Borg, which I'll briefly explain, were a group of human-machine combinations that created a culture based on everybody sharing the same consciousness, and individualities wiped out. So the Borg are very powerful because everybody gets these machines installed in their brain and in their eyes and their arms, so that they all basically look alike. They're machines. Now, they may be taller and shorter and stuff like that, but their individuality is spread out. And so that's what I think of when I hear assimilation. And the word assimilation sometimes now is a very big threat to people, because it means you're going to be like us, and you know, whatever you are from culture X, you're going to be like us, and we're culture Y, and culture X will be canceled out. Very, very good point there. I really enjoyed that. Also, another comment, I noticed that Barbara mentioned that we have people from the Congo and, the Congo, Somalia, and Ethiopia now coming into Schuyler and working with cargo, a lot of them. And that's really a big change, because Schuyler is a school that had a very heavy Hispanic presence. And I noticed you have Bolivians and Cubans too, which aren't real common in Lex, or if they are, I just haven't run into them. But it's interesting how more and more diverse these small agriculturally related jobs bring in people to town. And you're going to see a real difference. What's going to be interesting is African introduction to African culture from Africa into a town that's either white or Latin American more. And it takes longer. And I think you're going to see the issues of discrimination there, because everything's been hyped up on skin color in our culture for so long that people will, that sad to say, but I think that when it's more distinct and someone looks different or wears clothes that are different, that Islam is the other issue, that people are going to be more on defensive. And by the way, just to give you a preview of next week's lesson, the fifth week, I think it's fifth week, I'm going to talk about not using the word racist, even though it's perfectly acceptable. But in terms of dealing with people, trying to establish a different framework. And I'll just say it's three things. It's called, the first thing is invisibility, when you don't even notice people that are different because there are very few of them, or they don't interact with you, so they're invisible to you. The second thing is when you get paranoid, or people get paranoid, and they say, all these strangers are coming into town and we've got to defend against them. And that's called the defense. I call it the siege stage. They're going to overwhelm us. It's like the Greeks at Troy. They're going to take our city. And so people get paranoid that way. And then the third variation of that is when people think they're going to convert everybody and everybody's going to be assimilated. So that word assimilated is interesting. It's not the nice word you think it is. It's often used in anthropology or sociology, but it for some it represents extermination of their culture. Okay, all right. Now I'm kind of going backwards because I like to do things differently. Neil mentioned I found it very helpful, in addition to doing my own research on other cultures in my school, to also attend cultural events. I found out that my students appreciate this greatly. And you have to, time after school, you go to a community event or you go to a quinceanera. Did I say that right? I always mispronounce that. Quinceanera is the coming of age, the 15th birthday celebration for a young girl and woman in Latino culture. I'm not sure. I would say it's in Mexico and Central America, but it's kind of like a debutante ball, but it's a major milestone in the life of a child becoming an adult. It's kind of like a bar mitzvah or a bar mitzvah. There are similarities. For the rich people in Nebraska, we have the Axarbin, whatever that is, over in Utah or Omaha, sorry, and they have a debutante ball. It's all big money, high society. Okay, well, thank you, Sunil, for that. And one of the other things I really enjoyed, I'm kind of skipping around again, is what was the one about Bronx, New York, the experience of teaching in a school in Bronx, New York, and being, it was Brittany. This is great because you taught in Texas, but then you were in, let me see if you, I think it was you. Sometimes I get a little, okay, maybe there's a couple in here, but the one where it said that when you were the teacher, or some of you, when you were in a school and you were the minority, so the shoe was on the other foot, literally. And so you experienced somewhat of being that person who is different. Or you went out and made friends with people that are different, and that made you kind of different to the other students. So that's a really big thing there. Lillian, it was Lillian, had a somewhat different. You were teaching in a school, and you were called the white girl, and so you were a teacher there, and you mentioned in your response about you felt discriminated against or not feeling in place because you were different than most of the students. And so you kind of get an idea of what it would be like if a minority teacher were teaching in an all white school or any, we get real preoccupied with the culture in America. But if we were in another nation entirely, like in Malaysia or something, and you were an Indian person from India, of Indian descent, and you were teaching in a school where mostly the people were Chinese, or mostly the majority Malays, they call them, or Muslims in Malaysia, that there's a lot of discrimination. So if you're an Indian teacher in a school where it's dominated by another group, assuming you'd be in that school, it would be difficult. It would be difficult. You'd be treated differently. So I want to thank you for that section, Lillian, on that. And Brittany, you also mentioned about both of these were really good. I mean, I love reading about the Bronx and New Jersey. Of course, I'm a Yankee fan, and I'm happy these days. Um, and I had written down in here um, that you become an anthropologist or a sociologist. I like anthropology, but sociology, whatever you want to call it, a social study. You study social structure and ethnicity and things like this, and you get to experience. And the things you experience emotionally are much stronger. It's a much stronger lesson. Um, a couple of you mentioned things we're going to talk about in the class. Alexander, you mentioned about different sexual orientation of students. You know, we get very preoccupied in our society and we see diversity as, first of all, skin color or language or religious differences, something like that. I did enjoy, where did I read that? I think I'll get to it in a minute, but it was the one about being in Texas, I think, and that if you were a person who looked differently, that what saved you sometimes is if you went to a certain church, then you were okay because of the Bible Belt down there. That people, you're kind of given a pass if people knew you because you attended their church, then you became okay. You know, that's not unusual. It might be you work in a place as a laborer, and maybe you're a member of a union at some point. And if you're a member of the union, you're a brother or whatever, sister. You're a member of the union, and therefore, even though you're different, you're still supported. If you're a police officer, a minority police officer, you're still a police officer. So you get, obviously, doesn't mean it within the whatever group you're in that you get total freedom from discrimination, but it means that you have you have some contact. So that makes a difference. A great quote from Leah, which several people commented on. You were shocked that racism still exists, and you know, I'm not shocked, but a lot of us get comfortable and we think things are better. And just to give you an idea, I used to think when I grew up that racial discrimination was a thing of the past because my school was integrated when I was in 6th grade, integrated. African Americans attended all schools. Historically, back in Macon, Missouri, there was only a high school high school was integrated because there wasn't another high school. But before high school, all the way up to 8th grade, there was a school for African Americans and there was a Catholic school. Now, obviously, school for African Americans was because of discrimination. And so we integrated, I think in 7th grade, and we integrated some of the teachers too. And I, at the time, thought, well, everything went very smoothly. There were no fights or anything like on TV, but I didn't see the hidden world of what's really going on. And I know that people said things, and I can recall certain terms that were used by kids in 7th grade that were absolutely racist, but people at the time thought it was funny or something, you know. And then I had a couple of friends who are African American, and you know, I thought, well, because I know Dave Jackson and he's cool, that everything's fine. But of course, I didn't experience what other people experience. First of all, I wasn't black. And the second of all, there was a lot more going on. And I knew that. I always knew that, you know, we never really talked about the issues. We kind of just were friends, you know. And so, but you may have a quote here, and I wanted to read this for the class. Every person deserves a chance to improve their life and their family's life. Every person deserves to feel they are loved, accepted, and that they belong. And that's what's happening to people crossing the border and being put in cages. Just wanted to put that 2 cents in there because that's what people want. People move to do better. You love your kids. You want to. There's so many stories in here of people saving money to try to get their family from El Salvador or Guatemala. And, you know, I don't want to have to cite those specifically, but if you read all this, you'll see those stories. I like Robin. You said you like Katie's stories. Education should be an exchange of ideas. And you know, the titles teacher and student can bring to mind a hierarchy, but it's so powerful when students are the true teachers and we have great gift of learning from them. This happened constantly in climate club for me this year, especially from a girl whose parents are environmental lawyers. And that's interesting that you have that opportunity, because the climate movement and climate change that we're facing is so obviously a powerful thing in Europe and other parts of the world where people are seeing their islands disappear. And in the United States, we're still playing games with this. We don't even allow study of it. And we just, well, I won't have to go in. I think you watch the news. But the fact is that this is climate. What about other issues? You know, gun violence, treatment of women. I mean, some of these are identified as certain liberal issues, like, well, that's just a political partisan thing. I mean, having air to breathe is very partisan. I want air, but maybe you don't want me to have air. So we divide politically along the need for my body to have oxygen, all of our bodies. I will recycle the can. I know I shouldn't be drinking Coke. Okay. Nice little story, but Katie, you mentioned about a girl that was messing around in class and didn't seem happy, and one day she made some claws out of paper and gave them to somebody, and suddenly the students discovered, oh, you have a talent and this is cool, and then she had a friend. And the same thing with those of you that befriended students from other cultures when other people didn't, or when the teacher, and maybe I'll come across this as I leaf through this, but when the teacher invited the Brazilian parents came and talked about soccer, and suddenly the lights went on, light bulbs are flashing, and suddenly the kid in the class that was different, suddenly he had all this special knowledge his parents did about how to play soccer, and that became a little celebrity. And I always think you find the people that have gifts in your class under the assumption that everybody has gifts. You just have to look for them. They have a talent, they have something about them that's unique, and it's admirable. Okay, and I'm seeing it all over the place, and as I read these, you know, I know we're going to do Zoom, but I really like reading some of these because it's here, it's on paper, and we've got it. Oh, another one, a couple of things came up. Activities where you call them either a reunion or a class meeting. There were 4 or 5 different terms, and I forgot where that is, and I forgot who said it. I'll probably see it as I'm leafing through here. But it was about getting kids in groups and celebrating, and having these celebrations have different names. You know, could be a party, or it could be a fiesta, or it could be a game night or something, or multicultural, or, you know, Asian games or Asian food night or something. And you have an activity, and all that, you get students to participate in it either during the day or at night with their parents. Involving parents is big deal. I noticed the conversation table mentioned at UNK. That's where people would go and sit and talk. And I think people from the foreign language classes would go and sometimes get practice in Spanish, speaking to Spanish speakers. But also it was done to help international students have an opportunity to talk with American English speakers, which is the issue of international students on campus is a big issue. It's a lot of work, and I've done programming like that, and it's not easy. Sometimes people, or even young people, are very resistant to have an international roommate, or I've had international roommates. My wife's had international roommates from Central America and Japan and Africa, and so it wasn't odd to us. But for a lot of people, they're afraid. They don't, I don't want, it was very strange. People are so resistant. So you have to keep looking for opportunities to get interaction. Katie, you had a really good entry talking about new faces, and I'd written up here, have things changed that much? Some of you said, well, it's dated, and yeah, it's definitely a dated video. It's a little old, a little slow, but some of you also noticed that this stuff isn't disappearing right away, and it doesn't. Society changes very slowly. And you mentioned that having an ESL kid in the class, English learner, we call them English learners, and it was kind of sink or swim, and you spent some time working with this student. And this is usually the first experience that when a school has never had an English learner, maybe, who knows where they come from. Sometimes it's exchange students, but usually exchange students get a pass. They get treated like a little movie star or something because they're special. They come from Germany, or they may come from Asia or something, but they're kind of unique, and usually somebody's sponsoring them, maybe a teacher or somebody in the school. And so they're really eager to go out of their way to give them a really warm welcome. But socioeconomic issues have a lot to do with it. We haven't talked about that very much, but that blends in. The one that was interesting is the stereotype, and what was the one? I think it's right here. It was one about New Jersey. Megan was talking, and it was about sometimes we have stereotypes. This is a very important point here, and I mentioned stereotypes in the video. The stereotypes by themselves are just conceptual. What happens is a stereotype is when you go to somebody and say, oh, you're from such and such, your parents and stuff, I know them, you're probably going to be a banker, or you're going to be a medical doctor, because in your group, that's what's expected. And you have this concept in your head. Now, does that happen? Sometimes it does. Does that mean it's still stereotyping when you go up to somebody and you say, oh, you're from there, you must be a really good, and it doesn't matter what you say, because it's a stereotype. A dancer, a musician, a gangster, whatever, they're what I call positive stereotypes and negative stereotypes. But what does it do? It takes away your individuality. If you're a tall guy and people go up and keep asking when you're going to be on the basketball team, and that even if you're just tall guy and it's nothing to do with your ethnicity or anything, you don't want to be pressured to be on the basketball team, or you're a big guy and you're going to be on the football team, or you're a tall girl and you're going to be on the volleyball team. People, just assume. And while that may not offend people, but a lot of times when it deals with a different group that's a minority in the school or a majority in the school, depending on, some people attribute to them that, well, they're going to be hard working out in the field like migrants or something. What's interesting is that people have these stereotypes, and there was a case of a young lady from India. I think she was 9 years old, and she died crossing the border into the United States. And she's from India. People think, oh yeah, they're from El Salvador, Guatemala, something like that, Mexico. I said, no, they're not from there. People cross from many different, people go places and they try to get in any way they can. And so this little girl died, and she was from India. And I just remember thinking, well, that's not what people expected. And so that is so sad. The cooking is a big deal. That situation where the teacher didn't let the student, somehow didn't work with him or something, because during Ramadan, Alexander, you mentioned that. That's weird. Hopefully he wouldn't do that now. I want a couple other things. Robin's initial one, very thorough discussion of new faces on Main Street. Um, and you talk about being a teacher in Thailand and talking about the Hmong who were from Laos, country next to Thailand, and in between Thailand and India or Vietnam, and how the United States, sadly, the United States has a very short memory. We go places, we have landmines, bombs, and then we're gone. You know, unfortunately, landmines don't detonate themselves or remove themselves. Um, People don't know this, but after World War II, a lot of people were killed farming because they would be farming and they'd plow into a minefield and get blown up. Some of these explosives are good, can sit there for 50 years or maybe 100 years. I mean, who knows? And it's just horrible. And not only that, it's not where we go militarily. It's actually where mines are sown. I mean, you sell 500,000 landmines to somebody in a certain country, and once they're in place, everybody forgets about them. So you have people being killed by all kinds of weapons and ordnance, not to mention poison and other things that might have been spread about. Technology generally in war is going to be long term. Okay, I'm trying to think of anything else that would be useful here. Let's see. And I've written all over this. I hope you don't mind me doing this, but this is a lot better than me trying to type out some responses and say, oh, good job, or give you an A for that. I want to highlight things that I think are important in here. And I'm really excited, you know, reading these and absorbing them. I like to just sit down and drill myself through them. Gives me a chance to get a feel for it and what you're thinking. I think I already mentioned this, but a really good Michiko, your article on how hard language is. Aha, big one, big one. We need, you mentioned that the guy said in the video, they need to be more aggressive about learning language. Well, I got news for you, and I'm not even, I do this in ESL, but let me explain. Language, just conversational language, assuming you're really into it and you're exposed to it extensively during the day, it'll take you a couple of years as a child to be fairly fluent, just conversation, but it will take an adult longer depending on how much exposure. And the difference is not because your brain is stiff or doesn't work. The brain is not a muscle that grows old. The brain can stay pretty darn young for a very long time. I hope mine is evidence of that. And I can certainly attest that yours are very, I don't know how old you are, but I only see curious children here with great desire to learn. And learning a language is difficult. And when people are trying to work survival jobs, whether it's roofing or working meat packing or picking fruit or cleaning hotel rooms or doing whatever, you know, hard labor, you're exhausted physically. You don't learn language when you're exhausted watching a little television before you fall asleep. It's just noise to you. So as a person told me a long time ago, it's like Charlie, if you ever seen Charlie Brown's Teacher, if you ever seen the cartoon Charlie Brown, there's some cartoons where his teacher's talking and all he hears is blah, 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 blah. You know, I call it in Seinfeldese, I call it yada, 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 yada. I just go on and whatever. And so you have to take deliberate actions to teach language. And Michiko mentions this. And she has a little example of her son. And this is a teachable moment if I've ever seen one. She would, a type of Japanese box style lunch for her son called bento. And the other kids didn't know what it was and probably, you know, and he was different. So her son was in tears because kids had made fun of his food. And so they had a bento class, and the kids got to experience rice balls, fried eggs, and chicken nuggets. And I thought that Colonel had chicken nuggets. I didn't know that was, but seaweed, oh, that'd be so cool. maybe they didn't have calamari. I get that mixed up with the desert, Kalahari Desert, calamari. I've been playing too much Scrabble, so I'm getting weird. But anyhow, but this is a brilliant teachable moment where the kids were exposed to the food of another culture. And now they know, oh, that's cool, because they love to experience things. I'm not a fan of sushi. And but my kids eat sushi. My grown kids eat sushi. And young people eat sushi. Their stomachs are different. But I grew up eating meat and potatoes from the farm, mashed potatoes, steak, pork chops, green beans, salad or something from the garden. And that's what we had, fried eggs and bacon, That's about all we ate, a little cereal. And so my stomach is attuned to farm food, I know mashed potatoes is not an exciting international cuisine, but it makes me happy. I don't know why. It's psychological. But I just want to say that food is mentioned in here several places. Obviously, if you have an event, if it's in Nebraska, it's got to have food. But I would imagine the same. But I just want to appreciate you. I didn't mention everybody's name, but I do want to ask you if it's okay if I share this with my students. Nothing negative in here. It's all very brilliant stuff. And I'm so glad we have people teaching in diverse schools and diverse places, whether it's in Hong Kong or China or Japan or any of these places, Europe. It gives us insight into what's possible. And I also want to encourage you, if you're in ESL, that I like this, because you may find someone and talk to them and say, I want to go over there and teach for a while. So you may find that you want to go to Thailand, or you may want to go to, I don't know, Africa or Argentina or Chile. I always want to go to Chile. I don't know. Just because I like the idea of a desert kind of Mediterranean climate. And then it's winter here, but summer there. I mean, you miss winter completely. You could just keep rotating and never have a winter again. Anyhow, thank you. I know I talked too long, but I'm very excited about this class, and I appreciate what all you've said on here. Thank you.